This episode of Dispatches from Planet Albany is brought to you with support by New York State United Teachers, which represents more than 600,000 educators and school-related professionals in New York. Dispatches is also supported by the public affairs firm O'Donnell & Associates. For more information, check out o'donnellsolutions.com.
We signed off on nothing major. And this is what I'm telling y'all is wrong with this process. And I'm saying this to y'all very clearly. I'm never doing this again.
I've also declared war on potholes, so here's the first shot across the bow.
Well, as you know, with Planet Albany, there's always something that makes the planet turn.
And it's this amazing view of D.C., and Eddie Vedder comes out, and he goes, "You have a cigarette?" And I've never smoked in my life, but if I had, I wish that was the moment.
And this strategy takes us from potholes to knotholes.
I would like to say it was a pleasure, Mr. Kim. But I'm on the road.
I'm David Lombardo, and this is Dispatches from Planet Albany, a WCNY podcast about power and politics in New York State government. And on this episode, we're exploring how power is used in the budget process as state lawmakers, including Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie, gripe about Governor Kathy Hochul declaring a general agreement on the budget this past Thursday morning, despite the legislature's position that there is still a ways to go before they're on the same page, let alone dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's. And for more on those grievances, we're checking in with Assemblymember Emily Gallagher, a Brooklyn Democrat. So I had to grab you after walking down the hallway and hearing part of your interview with Spectrum, where you made a reference to dictatorship, alluding to Governor Kathy Hochul and the way she approaches this budget process. Before I share my own questions about that thought process, why do you use that word?
I used that word because it was at the forefront of my mind, first and foremost. Also because she has really manipulated a system that was already stacked against the legislature to make it so that she's basically prolonged what's supposed to be a 3-month process into a 6-month process by withholding our ability to get paid.
Which is part of a law that's on the books. Not like she created that.
Right. Also part of the law is that the budget is passed on April 1st, and she blows past that every single time intentionally so that we are in a vice grip, so that she can then tell us that we have to do the things that we've already expressed were crossing a line for us. Like the CLCPA rollbacks, we by and large do not agree with. And we've had to be negotiating that for weeks and weeks.
As far as I'm aware, though, those aren't in the budget bills. So why don't you just pass the existing Article 7 budget bills that have no CLCPA language in them?
That's a great question. And I'm so glad we're talking about this because I really think that the opacity of this is so challenging for people to understand, and it is really impacting their ability to live in New York, right? This is why the government is gummed up. So she gets to dictate the order in which the budget is discussed. And what she's been doing is that policy in the budget is called an Article 7. Mm-hmm. And what she's been doing is she's been refusing to discuss the financials until she gets the policies that she wants.
But that's not new. I mean, we could have seen the legislature propose a constitutional amendment and move said amendment years ago, and by now it could be in place. So
I am really fighting for that constitutional amendment. That's something that I've been pushing for. But I think a big part of that is that we are going to have to really break through with information and with education about the budget process and about how it works. And one of the things that is a challenge is that a lot of special interests, like you look at this car insurance thing, that is paid for by Uber and Lyft, right? They are paying for those ads. I believe it's their idea to do this whole thing.
Could be.
And they have a lot of money to spend on campaigns, and this is really a money and politics problem.
But there's money on the other side of this as well, though. There's money from the trial lawyers pushing back against that. It's not like there are advocates in this space who aren't well represented on potentially both sides of a lot of these issues. But I guess coming back to the idea of how did we get to this point, I mean, it seems like right now a lot of lawmakers are angry. The Speaker has expressed his discontentment with where we stand right now. Is it fair to say that this is kind of just the venting period that the governor has built into this system, though, where she lets the lawmakers blow off some steam, they stomp their feet for a little bit, and then in a couple days we'll get actual budget text and pass those bills, and maybe we'll hear some floor remarks about people who are unhappy with the process and why they're reluctantly voting yes, and then fast forward 6 more months and we do it all again?
Well, that is a dystopian view.
Or it's what's happened in the past.
Exactly. But I think you could be right, but I think there's also a repetition that's happening here where there's new little elements, right? For example, the press conference today where she says there's a deal. She's done this 2 other times when there wasn't a deal.
Sure.
And that pisses off the people who are in the legislature, because when there's not a deal, that means we haven't worked it out, and that creates a new pressure system to push us to collapse, because then all of a sudden it's us holding up the budget when she wasn't giving us the information that we needed to make actual decisions.
Yeah, how do you interpret this? Because to me it seems like it's her basically saying, we have a deal, which means I'm done negotiating. And then the leaders of both the Assembly and Senate basically come to their members and say, guys, this is what we've got. These are the big picture offerings from the governor, and she's not willing to move anymore. So it's up to you guys either to sign off on this or make a bigger stink about it. I mean, is that the choice you're basically positioned with?
Yeah, that is the choice that we're basically positioned with. And the thing that's really frustrating is we end up using our conference time to discuss, like regurgitated proposals that she is forcing us to do, instead of actually learning about new legislation that would move this state forward that is coming from our conference that is our job to create.
Like standalone bills.
Yeah,
to work
exactly.
on. Yeah.
So it's really a situation where we are giving up a lot of our own process because she's just dominating us, And that's why I said dictatorship, because a lot of times in this situation, it feels like we're here to perform a legislature that's not really being allowed to do a lot of the work that we're trying to do as legislators.
So then what holds up, say, like the constitutional amendment? You're not necessarily a fresh face anymore in Albany.
Hey.
I just mean you now have some years of seniority that you've racked up, since 2020, right? Mm-hmm. And so the constitutional amendment idea is not new to you, and the governor can't stop a constitutional amendment. She could potentially lobby against a referendum if it gets to that point. So how do you get the Speaker to get on board with something like this? Because if we want to talk about dictatorships, he could potentially bring that type of thing to the floor tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that's something that, my colleagues and I are discussing. How do we build the case for this that, doesn't make anybody feel like, I think the fear is that because the governor has so much sway in the budget process, like she could put the entire budget in an extender and then force us to vote on that. Sure. There's a lot of trepidation when it comes to, are we going to poke the bear? Are we going to do something that's going to make her mad? And then what will her reaction be?
Sure.
Because if she puts the whole budget in the extender, then we don't really have information we don't have the opportunity to even negotiate it, even though it feels a lot of the time like we're not getting the respect in the negotiation that we're looking for. So there's a level of what will this fight look like, and how do we do our best to manage the fight in a way that is meaningful. And I think it's really important for us to consider those things, but I also think it's important to act, which is why I've been so public about my desire to see the constitutional amendment get pushed forward. I think that if people paid more attention to state government, which I know you pay a lot of attention to.
Too much.
They would see how much of our daily lives is impacted and touched by state legislature, and how this is actually the legislative body that can impact, the livability of this state the most. And the people of New York deserve the opportunity to have the people that they know, that they elected, that are in their communities several days a week, if not the whole week, during legislative session, that those people should be the ones who are creating, debating, and defining what the policy of the state is.
Well, to get that process conversation in front of people and to get them to actually care about it, I mean, most media outlets will do one story about that a year. Maybe this year was in the context of the speaker saying, hey, the media, you're not doing this enough. But when I think about people who might be able to activate and motivate people on this, my head immediately goes to New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani. So are you frustrated that in this budget process, he has not necessarily wielded all of the influence that he could potentially have with his 11 million Instagram followers? I mean, if he did an explainer video about the budget process in Albany, I think there would be a lot of people who would probably laugh and then also learn something about Albany. So, I mean, is he the person who can do that breakthrough? And two, are you disappointed that it hasn't been a big focus of him?
I think he is... he's a friend of mine, and I think that he is really dealing with a lot as a brand new mayor. But I do think that he has already shown more attention to the budget process than we've seen previous mayors do, and he's already explained more and gotten more people involved. I think it's really up to those of us who are in the state legislature and in state government to try to get into people's view as much as he has. I think we have to learn from him and work with him to get those messages out. And it's nice that he comes from the legislature so that we can collaborate in that way. But, I think he's doing a great job, and he's using the media effectively. And I think it's something that we can all learn from. And by creating our own kind of communication strategy around what we want people to know about and what we want people to do, I think he's taught us a valuable lesson about that. And it can't just be him, right? Because there's way too much information out there for him alone to handle. Sure. So I think that it's something that we're all kind of working on. We saw, with the socialists in office, we saw, we've really ramped up our kind of communication strategy and trying to inform people, getting people more involved in the fight for revenue with our Tax the Rich campaign. The other day I was walking down the street, not in my district, and a guy on a bike rode by, and then he circled back and he said, "Hey, Assemblymember Emily Gallagher, tax the rich," and put his arm up in the air and then cycled on his way. And, that was like, couldn't have been further from my district in New York City. And, I knew that he knew who I was and what I was talking about. So I think that that's a really important moment that we are building still. And the more we can get people to see that the heart of what government is actually supposed to be reflecting people and not just those who can spend a lot of their revenue on bullying politicians.
Well, speaking of bullying, how much of the next few days at conference is going to be essentially a therapy session for lawmakers as you guys take your couple minutes to share and vent?
I mean, it's kind of always like group therapy, That's why I love the Bob Newhart show, It's like very reminiscent of being in conference. So. And
as I think about the press conference the governor held this morning, where there were still a lot of unknowns at, say, some of the top line spending figures, for example, what's your sense of how much of the budget is still open? And are there elements of it where you're still like, hey, I might be able to get in this bill. I might be able to ensure this version of super speeders is adopted, or I can get X amount of dollars for something in Brooklyn. I mean, are you still like talking to Phil Fields and saying, hey, can I still get money for this? Or do you say, it's over my head at this point?
I mean, I always tell new legislators that if you're not humiliated at the end of the day, then you haven't done your job. Like, I think our job is to always be cajoling and, trying to get more for our people. And I think that's what a lot of us spend our time doing. If we believe that we're actually going to get those things, or if it's just an exercise, I think it varies from legislator to legislator. But until it's a closed book, it's an open book.
Does that go for everything, though? Or just certain
Certainly things get shut down over time. And there are things where, you do feel like the cake is baked on certain things. So.
And at this point in your experience here in Albany, do you know who to talk to? Are you like, this is the person that I need to bend the ear of, or I need to wait out in this hallway to grab Phil Fields again, to make that reference? I mean, how is your approach to navigating this period? Because like I mentioned, like you talked about, this is not new in
Right.
Albany. This is now something you've seen with this governor multiple times.
Yeah, I think that it becomes like, instead of an exciting thing, it becomes like a real drag. I think it takes a while to learn the social mores of the legislature.
What do you mean by that?
Like how to conduct yourself, how to talk to the program and council staff, how to talk to the different kinds of leaders, and how to actually receive information and give information in a way that is productive and positive. And, I can be quite aggressive and quite direct. I can also be very nice. And I think it's like learning how to balance those two energies that has really been a help to me. I think also much of what you see come out is not done in the year of the, if it's in the budget or if it's in a piece of legislation, it's not necessarily done that year. Like, I've been working on super speeders for 3 years, right? It was never really getting a lot of traction in the assembly, but you create conditions, you help people come to understand the bill, you get people on the bill, you get people in the world out talking about the bill, and then all of a sudden things speed up. And I think the key to doing this job is to always be ready that when the toast pops up, that you've got your tongs and your butter so that the butter melts, right?
Sure. Well, lastly, I'm curious about this process that you're going to go through now as you think about, well, how am I going to vote on these bills? Because while there are a handful of things, right, that the governor has held out for and things that you probably are not supportive of or maybe aren't 100% happy with, like, this represents a fraction of the budget. And then there's like the other 90% of the budget. So how do you go about trying to figure out what you're going to do on the budget bills, and how do you make sure that leadership is aware of what you're going to do? Do you try to keep them abreast as early as possible? What do the next few days, hopefully days, look like?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, like, we often don't find out where things are in the budget until like a day or two before we're voting on it, if that. With certain things, you're really weighing, is there any forward momentum, and like what direction can I take from this situation, and how can I move my goals for my district forward despite this hurdle that's been put in there. So I think it's been, very productive to talk to the speaker in advance and tell him, like, when something is just not going to work for me, and, try to really advocate for the things that I really want. And, he says that the best budget is where nobody's really that happy, but nobody's really that angry. And I think, I've tried to learn how do I map out like what I can do to still resolve the issues that I see a bad budget bill bringing. So like, can I get more money for building public renewables? Can I get more money for storm resiliency? Can I get, things, can I get the Sunny Act for balcony solar included into the budget? If I can get some of those things that are going to move our climate goals forward, regardless of the big disruption that the CLCPA gutting may have, then I can feel okay about moving forward with that bill. But if there's no route around it, like with a lot of the criminal justice reform stuff in the past, as someone who regularly visits jails and prisons and sees the conditions that people are being held in and how often people who are being held in Rikers for years and years without even being formally accused of a crime, right? They've just been picked up and they're like waiting for a trial. That was a harder thing to see. Like, how do we get around that? Because that's somebody's life that you're throwing away, right, into a bad situation. So you have to really think about how can I continue to advocate for the things that are important to my constituents? How do I build a new model? It's always, I often think about this job, like when I am trying to route a trip on the MTA, right? You're looking at the map, you're like, oh, I'm going to take the G to the E, and then you get to the G train's down. Okay, so now I'm going to have to take a bus, or I'm going to have to take a bike. Once I do that, once I see if there's bikes available or if the bus is on its way, then I decide what the next train is going to be based on that, right? So it's always having a map in your mind of how to get to the final destination, but with a lot of reroutes.
Yeah, because I think one approach to that would be to then, the G train's down, I'm going to self-immolate instead. Yeah. But no, you're trying to get somewhere, and then maybe when you finish that route, you talk to people and you begin advocating for maybe a different train route or more reliable train routes if we continue that metaphor. I appreciate you making this time to talk about the budget, and I hope maybe this has helped you blow off a little steam.
It helped a lot.
Okay.
Made me a little mad at you, too, but, that's good.
Well, it's like Carl Heastie says, if it's a good interview, if everyone's just a little mad after the interview. But thank you so much, Assemblymember. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I like to say that anyone betting in the prediction markets on whether I was going to say Buffalo Sabres, you just won. Go Sabres, go Bills.